Don't say you're sorry. This is your job. His grip on her hip tightened. Don't pull away from me. She swallowed hard. You're the one leaving. He hesitated. I'll be gone for a few days. Will you be okay here alone? She forced a smile. I'll be fine. His jaw tightened. This is your home now. If you want to invite friends over, you don't need my permission. The sadness in her chest deepened. When will you be back? I don't know. A few days. And then he was gone, leaving her feeling more alone than ever. 3 days away had felt like an eternity. Stepping into the elevator, Dominic was relieved to be back, though he wasn't sure why. He'd told Arya he'd be home tomorrow, but the thought of staying away any longer had been unbearable. As he approached the penthouse, laughter drifted from inside. Her laughter. Then a deep male voice. Right there, baby girl? Dominic froze. A long, satisfied moan followed. Yeah, right there. His blood boiled. Charging into the den, he found a tattooed man holding Arya's ankle, a smirk on his face. Dominic snarled. You want to get your hands off my wife? Arya gasped. Dominic! I thought you weren't back until tomorrow. He ignored her, his glare locked on the man. We haven't met, the guy said, extending a hand. I'm Adrian. Dominic didn't take it. What the hell were you doing with your hands on my wife? Arya covered her mouth, stifling a laugh. Dominic, he's my cousin. I told you about him. Adrian chuckled. Relax, man. She had a cramp. I was massaging it out. Dominic glared, still unconvinced. Arya sighed. You're being ridiculous. Dominic exhaled sharply, realizing he might have overreacted. He ran a hand through his hair. Fine. Adrian grinned. You should see your face, dude. Dominic shot him a warning glare, but Arya was laughing now, her green eyes sparkling. He sighed. He was home. Arya couldn't believe the words that had just left her mouth. Had she really agreed to this? The intensity in Dominic's eyes, the way he claimed her as his wife, was overwhelming. There had been tension between them for weeks, an unspoken connection, and now it was all coming to the surface. Dominic leaned against the counter, rolling up his sleeves as if preparing for a serious discussion. His gaze was locked on her, his confidence unwavering. So, tell me, Mrs. Devereaux, he said smoothly. She blinked. What? His smirk deepened. How do you like to be taken care of? Do you trust me? Her heart pounded. She hesitated, then nodded, even though uncertainty bubbled inside her. There was something about him that made her feel safe, despite his overbearing nature. Dominic stepped closer, placing a firm but gentle hand under her chin, tilting her face to meet his. I'll take care of you, he assured her. Her breath hitched. She had never been with someone who paid this much attention to her emotions, to her needs. There was an intensity in Dominic's eyes, a silent promise that he would never leave her feeling unseen. But suddenly, self-consciousness crept in. I didn't even freshen up after work, she blurted out. I should have. Dominic exhaled sharply, shaking his head. Ari, you don't need to overthink everything. His voice softened. You're perfect as you are. Her cheeks burned. I don't know. He placed his hands on her shoulders, grounding her. You're beautiful, he murmured, his voice low and sincere. And you don't have to be anything other than yourself with me. The warmth of his words wrapped around her like a blanket, easing the tension in her shoulders. She had spent so much of her life feeling like she needed to meet expectations, to be a certain way. But Dominic, he saw her. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly wanted. But then, just as quickly as he had pulled her into his orbit, he stepped back. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving her breathless and confused. She sat there, heart still racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Chapter 24. Dominic stormed into his room, pacing back and forth, running a hand through his hair. He needed distance. He needed to think. His heart was still pounding from the way Arya had looked at him. The way she had let her guard down, even just for a moment. He had told himself that this was just a simple agreement, a marriage built on logic, not emotions. But that illusion was shattering fast. He turned on the cold water in the bathroom sink, splashing his face. His reflection in the mirror looked back at him with an expression he didn't quite recognize. Why had he walked away? Because if he hadn't, he wasn't sure he would have been able to stop. Minutes later, he emerged from the bathroom, grabbing a cup of coffee in the kitchen, trying to focus on anything but what had just happened. Then, he heard her voice. That was an awful move, you know. He turned to see Arya standing in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes filled with something between frustration and hurt. "What are you talking about?" he asked, though he had a feeling he already knew. "You walked out," she said, frowning. "You just left." Dominic exhaled, rubbing his temples. "Ari, I was trying to do the right thing." Her eyes narrowed. "The right thing?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "If I had stayed, I wouldn't have been able to stop." Silence stretched between them. Her expression softened as realization dawned. "Oh." Dominic ran a hand through his hair, his voice quieter this time. "I promised you no expectations. To stay would have broken that promise." She swallowed. I thought you regretted it." His brows furrowed. "Regret?" He shook his head. "Not for a second." Her breath caught. For a moment, they just stood there, staring at each other. There was so much unspoken between them, so much tension that neither of them knew how to navigate. Dominic reached out, brushing his fingers along her cheek. "We haven't been great at communicating, have we?" She let out a small laugh. "No, we haven't. How about we change that?" he suggested. "From now on, we say what we really want." Arya hesitated, then nodded. "I'd like that." A slow, knowing smile touched his lips. "Good." She stared up at him, her pulse quickening. For the first time, it felt like they were stepping into something real. Something that wasn't just an agreement on paper. But before either of them could say anything else, Dominic's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, glancing at the screen, his jaw tightening. "I have to take this," he muttered. Arya's expression fell slightly, but she quickly masked it. "Of course." He hesitated, as if torn between the call and her, then sighed. "We'll talk later, okay?" She nodded, though something in her eyes told him she wasn't sure if she believed him. Reluctantly, Dominic turned and walked out, leaving her standing alone in the kitchen once again. And for the second time that night, Arya was left wondering what exactly was happening between them. Arya sat at Adrian's kitchen counter, her face burning with embarrassment. "Oh my God, Ad?" "I basically threw myself at him, and he just walked out." Adrian smirked, unwrapping his sandwich. "He didn't say anything? Not even a goodbye?" "He said we'd talk later." Ed rolled his eyes. "So, he didn't just leave you hanging. Probably had some billionaire business to attend to." "Pretty sure the world waits for Dominic Devereaux," Arya grumbled. Adrian chuckled. At least what?" She narrowed her eyes. "From what you told me, he doesn't seem like the type of guy to do anything, at least. When he finally gives in, you probably won't be able to walk." "Shut up, frat boy." She threw a grape at him. He caught it midair and grinned. "Ari, you're blind. No guy does what he did last night if he's not into you." She groaned. "What am I supposed to do? I can't just wait for him forever." "Then don't," Adrian said nonchalantly. "Seduce him." Arya gaped at him. "And how do I do that?" "The man is an ice machine." Adrian smirked. "He wasn't last night." Arya rolled her eyes but couldn't argue. Dominic had been fire. Adrian's expression softened. "He's just a guy, baby girl. Cook him a steak, wear something sexy, and he'll be putty in your hands." Arya sipped her drink, contemplating. Maybe it was time she took control. The high-pitched shriek of the smoke alarm made her jump. Oh no. She bolted out of the bathroom, still dripping from her shower, wrapped in only a bathrobe. Smoke billowed from the oven. Coughing, she grabbed a dish towel and flung the oven door open. A wave of smoke and burning cheese hit her. Panicking, she yanked the tray out, only to drop it. Sizzling cheese splattered everywhere. Oh crap. The alarm continued its assault on her ears. She looked up at the blaring device. How was she supposed to turn it off? Dominic stormed in, his sharp eyes scanning the scene. Without a word, he opened the windows and pressed a button on a panel, silencing the alarm. Relief flooded Arya, but the humiliation stayed. "I was trying to make Dauphinoise potatoes," she admitted. Dominic's gaze shifted to the mess. "Maybe because you were using the grill instead of the oven." She threw up her hands. "There are 6 dozen buttons. Why does it need so many functions?" Dominic retrieved an oven mitt, picked up the ruined tray, and tossed the entire thing into the trash. Then he turned to her, his lips twitching in amusement. "Cooking isn't really your strong suit, huh?" She pouted. "Your fancy oven doesn't make it easy." His gaze flickered to her bathrobe, which clung to her damp skin. "Were you making a special dinner?" She hesitated. "Kind of." "For what?" Her stomach tightened. "I just thought it would be nice." Dominic's lips curved slightly. "And you were planning to eat dinner in your bathrobe?" She clenched her fists. "No. I just stepped out of the shower when the alarm went off." Then there was a cheese explosion. His deep chuckle sent a shiver down her spine. I'm fine, she insisted, sucking on her burned thumb. Dominic frowned and took her hand. Let me see. He pulled her toward the sink, turned on the cold water, and held her thumb under the stream. This should help. I said I'm fine, she muttered. His brown eyes studied her. When was the last time you let someone take care of you? She blinked, caught off guard. I don't remember. Dominic's thumb traced circles over her palm. Well, I appreciate the effort, even if the execution was questionable. She chuckled. Yeah. I should have stuck to steak and fries. Dominic placed a hand over his heart. Now that is the way to my heart. Then, he leaned closer, his voice teasing. Or was it my pants you were trying to get into? Heat flooded Arya's face. His smirk widened. That was it, wasn't it? She tried to hold on to her dignity. I wasn't planning to seduce you. No? His brow arched. Well, no, Dominic's arms wrapped around her waist. His breath was warm against her ear. Then what exactly were you hoping for, Arya? Her lips parted, but no words came. He tilted his head. Tell me, mi amor. The Spanish endearment sent warmth curling in her stomach. She swallowed hard, gathering courage. I want you to kiss me. A low growl rumbled in his throat. I can do that. And he did. Arya sat stiffly, fingers picking at the lace trim on the tablecloth, wishing she was anywhere but here. Facing her mother and brother, Vincent, was never pleasant, and today would be no different. She needed to have this conversation alone, without Dominic, her husband, present. You're quieter than usual, her mother observed. Just thinking. She sighed. Is Vincent joining us? He'll be down shortly. The parlor was as suffocating as ever. It had always been her mother's domain, filled with unspoken rules and constant disapproval. Vincent sauntered in, his smirk already setting her on edge. You look tired, sister. Is married life wearing you out? Actually, it's great. That's what I wanted to talk about. She met their skeptical gazes. I know this marriage was a business arrangement, but it's working. And I want to be clear about the so-called cheating clause. Vincent rolled his eyes. You're still harping on about that? Dominic isn't a cheater, and your little honey trap idea is ridiculous. Promise me you won't try it. He sneered. If you're so sure of him, why worry? Because it's wrong. Promise me, Vincent. Vincent's face darkened as he stood, towering over her. You're warning me? Their mother placed a calming hand on his arm, and he sat down, his jaw clenched. This is the easiest way to get you out of this marriage, Arya. I don't want out. She exhaled. I love him, and I think in time he might love me too. Vincent laughed cruelly. You're pathetic. That man doesn't care about you. He just needs an heir. Tears stung her eyes, but she stood her ground. Promise me, Vincent. Or I'll tell him about your scheme. A tense silence filled the room. Finally, their mother gave a small nod, and Vincent spat. Fine. But don't come crawling back when he realizes how useless you are. Arya turned on her heel and left. The moment she saw Teddy, Dominic's driver, waiting at the end of the driveway, she nearly wept in relief. Mr. Devereaux told me to wait for you, Teddy said, concern in his eyes. Are you all right? Yeah. She forced a smile. I could really use a hug. Without hesitation, Teddy wrapped his arms around her. Will you take me home? She asked softly. My pleasure, Mrs. Devereaux. Dominic's phone buzzed. Everything okay? Teddy hesitated. Mrs. Devereaux just left her mother's house, and she seemed upset. Dominic's grip tightened on his phone. Bring her to me. She said she wanted to go home. You can get her here faster than I can get home. Bring her. After hanging up, Dominic looked up to find his father and brothers watching him. Ari left her mother's house upset. She's on her way here, he said. His father nodded. I'll set another place for dinner. Mason frowned. Did she say what happened? No. But I have a feeling it involves her brother. Mason shuddered. That guy gives me the creeps. Dominic clenched his jaw. He knew something was wrong, but Ari wasn't the type to open up easily. He would have to wait until she was ready to talk. When Arya arrived, she seemed better, though still exhausted. Hey, my amor, he said, pulling her into a hug. My dad and brothers were giving me hell for not bringing you today. Stay for dinner? She hesitated. I was going to take a bath and sleep early. You can do that here. We'll stay over, watch one of those cheesy movies you love. A small smile tugged at her lips. Okay. That sounds nice. Later, as she walked into the massive bathroom, her eyes widened. Wow, that tub is huge. Seems like a shame for one person to use it alone. She smirked. Aren't you supposed to be helping with dinner? Nah. He waved dismissively. Tonight, I'm here to serve you. She pulled off her sweater, revealing smooth skin and soft curves. Dominic swallowed hard. You can't strip in front of me and expect me not to look, my amour. She laughed, stepping into the steaming water. Oh, this is amazing. Dominic joined her, pulling her against his chest. She sighed contentedly, leaning into him. After a moment, she murmured, Did Tedward tell you I was upset? He did. Traitor. Dominic kissed her temple. It's his job to look after you. What happened? Just my brother being an ass. I won't be going back for a while. Dominic tensed. What did he say? Nothing new. He's always been like that. Dominic frowned. Has he always treated you that way? She sighed. Can we not talk about Vincent? Dominic studied her, recognizing her attempt to change the subject. He let it go for now. Later that night, after dinner, she lay on top of him, naked and warm beneath the covers. I love dinner with your family. Can we do it more often? He ran his fingers down her back. As often as you want. She smiled, resting her head against his chest. Now tell me what the deal is with your brother. Her body tensed. What do you mean? You're always on edge around him. Do I need to kill him? She jabbed his ribs playfully. No. Dominic's voice softened. Tell me. She sighed. He's always been a jerk, but I never saw much of him when I was younger. Then, after my dad died, Dominic stroked her back, encouraging her to continue. We were supposed to go to the beach that weekend, but I wanted to go to my best friend's birthday party. My mom said no, and I threw a tantrum. Dad decided we'd both stay home. The next day, he let me go to the party anyway. That's when the break-in happened. Her voice wavered. If we'd been at the beach, my dad wouldn't have been home. He'd still be alive. Dominic cupped her face, wiping away her tears. Ari, that's not your fault. She shook her head. Vincent made me believe it was. He's used it against me my whole life. Dominic's jaw clenched. Your brother was the one who wanted to go to the beach? Yes. He was furious when Dad changed plans. A spark of suspicion flared in Dominic's mind. And today? He asked. He was just being his usual cruel self. Dominic's muscles coiled with restrained fury. Would you like me to have a word with him? She sat up. Please don't. I'd rather spend time with your family. He exhaled slowly, pulling her close again. Your family too now, Spitfire. She smiled a genuine, warm smile that melted him. He was supposed to be the cold one, but with her, all he felt was fire. Dominic stepped into the back office of the Emerald Shamrock nightclub, scanning the space for Shane Ryan, one of the 4 brothers who owned the club. Shane was perched on the edge of his desk, coffee mug in hand, and eyed Dominic over the rim before setting it down. You want one? Shane gestured toward the coffee machine. Dominic shook his head. I'm good, thanks. Shane leaned forward, his massive arms resting on the desk. Haven't seen you at the gym for weeks. Did I hit you too hard last time? Dominic smirked. You wish. Shane chuckled. By the way, congrats on the wedding. That was unexpected. Dominic shrugged. What can I say? I'm a hopeless romantic. Shane laughed harder. Yeah, right. You should bring her to the club sometime. Jessie would love to meet her. Dominic narrowed his eyes. Which club are you talking about? Shane smirked. Whichever one you prefer, buddy. Dominic knew what that meant. Shane and his brothers owned not only the exclusive Emerald Shamrock, but also a private members-only establishment. He waved off the suggestion, keeping the conversation on track. I actually came here for business, Dominic said. I need something looked into. It's delicate, and I can't trust just anyone with it. Shane leaned back in his chair. You want Jessie to handle it? Jessie, Shane's wife, was one of the most skilled hackers in the country. If there was information to be found, she could get it. Yeah, Dominic confirmed. Shane raised a brow. You do realize I'm the one paying you, right? Lately, it feels like I'm the one working for you. Dominic didn't argue. He had requested Jessie's help several times over the past few months. You've been keeping yourself out of trouble lately. That's not my fault. Shane chuckled. What can I say? The love of a good woman changes a man. Dominic smirked. Which is why I know you'll agree to this. Shane shook his head, amused. You're something else. Fine. I'll have her call you. Dominic nodded. I appreciate that. What's this about anyway? Shane asked. It's about a murder from 17 years ago. Shane's expression turned serious. And why is it delicate? Dominic hesitated. The victim was my wife's father. I'd rather not make it public that I'm looking into it. Shane gave a knowing nod. Understood. As Dominic left the club, he knew he had taken the first step in uncovering the truth. Whatever secrets were buried in the past, he was determined to bring them to light. Arya scrolled through her phone while eating a late-night bowl of cereal. She nearly choked on her spoonful when she noticed Dominic leaning against the kitchen doorway, arms crossed and smirking at her. "How long have you been standing there?" she asked, wiping her chin with her sleeve. "Long enough to watch you inhale that cereal," he teased. She set the bowl down. "I didn't have time for lunch today. I thought you'd be working late." "We finished early," he said, stepping closer. "Have you eaten?" She nodded. "You?" He shook his head. "But I see something delicious I'd love to devour." She blushed as he brushed a kiss against her temple. "I'll order takeout," he murmured. "I can cook." He grinned. "I'd rather you spend the next half hour doing something else." She laughed. "If you insist, Mr. Devereaux." "Speaking of which, we have an event Saturday night," he said. She sighed. "What event?" "One of my father's investor dinners." "He wants us there." "Okay," she agreed. "Will you let me pick your dress?" She raised an eyebrow. "You don't trust me to pick something fancy?" He smirked. "I trust you. But I want to choose something that will make me not want to take my eyes off you all night." She rolled her eyes playfully. "Fine. But only if you behave." He chuckled. "No promises." At the gala, Dominic handed Arya a glass of champagne. "Have I told you how stunning you look tonight, Mrs. Devereaux?" She smiled. "You did. But feel free to keep saying it." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a low murmur. "You look breathtaking." Her heart skipped a beat. But just as she was about to reply, a voice interrupted. "Dominic." A woman approached, her blonde hair styled to perfection. Dominic greeted her politely. "Deandra, this is my wife, Arya." Deandra barely glanced at Arya before focusing back on Dominic. "I heard you got married." "Such a shame." Arya raised an eyebrow. "Pleasure to meet you too, Deandra," she said sweetly. "Enjoy your conversation with my husband." Then she turned and walked away. Before she could get far, Dominic caught her wrist. "Where do you think you're going?" She glared at him. "Back to the party, since you seem so entertained." He sighed and gently led her into a quieter hallway. "Ari, Deandra flirts with every wealthy man she meets." "It's nothing. She was practically draped over you." He smirked. "Jealous?" "Annoyed," she corrected. "Well, for what it's worth, I thought it was adorable," he said. "Watching you get all feisty." She huffed. "I am not feisty." His gaze softened. "Ari, you're the only one I care about. Don't let someone like Deandra get to you." She hesitated, then sighed. "Fine. But next time, shut it down faster." He chuckled. "Deal." As they re-entered the ballroom, Dominic whispered in her ear, "By the way, I'm still picking out your dress for the next event." She smirked. "We'll see about that." He laughed, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Oh, my amour, you keep me on my toes." And just like that, the tension faded, replaced by the comfort of knowing they were in this together. Dominic guided Arya into the car, nodding at his driver before sliding in beside her. As soon as the door closed, he pulled her onto his lap, his arms tightening around her waist. She laughed, wriggling playfully. "What are you doing?" "I've been waiting all night to hold you like this," he murmured, his lips brushing against her temple. Arya sighed, melting into his touch. "You picked this dress." "Your fault." He chuckled, fingers tracing circles on her back. "I take full responsibility." They talked softly, their voices blending with the hum of the car. Dominic played with a strand of her hair, admiring the way it shimmered under the dim lights. "I still can't believe we're married," Arya said. Dominic smiled. "Believe it, mi amor. You're stuck with me." The ride home passed in comfortable silence, interrupted only by the occasional shared glance or stolen kiss. Arya stepped out of the shower, wrapping a towel around herself just as Dominic appeared in the doorway. "I thought you'd be home late," she said, startled. "Meetings ended early." He leaned against the frame, eyes twinkling. "And I decided I'd rather be here with you." She rolled her eyes. "That's sweet. But I haven't even started dinner." "I have a better idea," he said, stepping closer. "Let's go out." Her stomach growled, making him smirk. "I take that as a yes?" Laughing, she nodded. "Give me 20 minutes." Dinner was at a charming Spanish restaurant, decorated with twinkling lights and warm colors. As they settled in, an old acquaintance of Arya's appeared. "Arya Edison," a voice boomed. She looked up to see Craig, a former college classmate, grinning as he approached their table. Before she could react, he pulled her into a hug. Dominic tensed, his gaze sharp. "Mind letting go of my wife?" Craig, clearly tipsy, chuckled. "Husband, huh? Lucky guy." Arya pulled away, her cheeks warm. "Good to see you, Craig." Craig gave Dominic a lazy smile before his friend called him away. As he walked off, Dominic's expression remained unreadable. "Was that necessary?" Arya asked once they were alone. "He had his hands all over you." "It was a hug," she argued. Dominic leaned in, voice low. "I know the difference between a friendly hug and something else." Their conversation shifted, but attention lingered. Dominic's possessiveness both frustrated and thrilled her. As they finished their meal, he excused himself briefly. When he returned, he was smiling. "What did you do?" Arya asked suspiciously. "I asked the manager for some privacy." Her eyes widened as she realized the restaurant was gradually emptying. "You didn't." "I did." "You're insane." He smirked. "And you love it." Arya shook her head, but her heart pounded. Dominic had a way of always keeping her on edge, never knowing what he'd do next. Alone now, he reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. "You drive me crazy, you know that?" She swallowed, feeling the heat between them rise again. "Likewise." Dominic pulled her close, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Then let's get out of here." Arya smiled, knowing the night was far from over. Dominic pulled Arya onto his lap as soon as they were in the car, his arms securing her in place. She laughed, wriggling slightly. "What are you doing?" "I've been waiting all night to hold you like this," he murmured, brushing his lips over her temple. Arya sighed, relaxing into him. "You picked this dress." "Your fault." He chuckled, fingers tracing circles on her back. "I take full responsibility." The ride home was filled with quiet conversation, occasional glances, and the warmth of being in each other's presence. Stepping out of the shower, Arya barely had time to grab a towel before Dominic appeared in the doorway. "I thought you'd be home late," she said, startled. "Meetings ended early." He leaned against the frame, smirking. "And I decided I'd rather be here with you." She rolled her eyes. "That's sweet. But I haven't even started dinner." "I have a better idea," he said, stepping closer. "Let's go out." Her stomach growled, making him grin. "I take that as a yes?" Laughing, she nodded. "Give me 20 minutes." Dinner was at a charming Spanish restaurant, decorated with twinkling lights and warm colors. As they settled in, an old acquaintance of Arya's appeared. "Arya Edison?" A voice boomed. She looked up to see Craig, a former college classmate, grinning as he approached their table. Before she could react, he pulled her into a hug. Dominic tensed, his gaze sharp. "Mind letting go of my wife?" Craig, clearly tipsy, chuckled. "Husband, huh? Lucky guy." Arya pulled away, her cheeks warm. "Good to see you, Craig." Craig gave Dominic a lazy smile before his friend called him away. As he walked off, Dominic's expression remained unreadable. "Was that necessary?" Arya asked, once they were alone. "He had his hands all over you." "It was a hug," she argued. Dominic leaned in, voice low. "I know the difference between a friendly hug and something else." Their conversation shifted, but attention lingered. Dominic's protectiveness both frustrated and thrilled her. As they finished their meal, he excused himself briefly. When he returned, he was smiling. "What did you do?" Arya asked suspiciously. "I asked the manager for some privacy." Her eyes widened as she realized the restaurant was gradually emptying. "You didn't." "I did." "You're insane." He smirked. "And you love it." Arya shook her head, but her heart pounded. Dominic had a way of always keeping her on edge, never knowing what he'd do next. Alone now, he reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. "You drive me crazy, you know that?" She swallowed, feeling the heat between them rise again. "Likewise." Dominic pulled her close, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Then let's get out of here." Arya smiled, knowing the night was far from over. Dominic carried Arya into their penthouse, both of them breathless from laughter. The playful teasing from dinner had followed them home, and now, standing in the dimly lit living room, the air between them was thick with unspoken words. "You know, you're infuriating," she murmured, tilting her chin up at him. He smirked, running his fingers along her jaw. "And you love it." She scoffed, but her smile gave her away. They spent the rest of the evening wrapped in each other's presence, talking, teasing, and eventually falling asleep in a tangle of limbs, the steady rhythm of Dominic's heartbeat, lulling Arya into a peaceful sleep. The next morning, Dominic woke to find Arya curled up beside him, her hair splayed across the pillow. He studied her peaceful expression, a slow smile spreading across his face. When she stirred, her green eyes blinked open, and a sleepy smile formed on her lips. "Morning. Morning, sleeping beauty," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her forehead. She stretched. "What time is it?" "Almost 11. Her eyes widened. "Why did you let me sleep so late?" He shrugged. "You needed it. Plus, it's Sunday. We have nowhere to be except right here." She hummed, nestling closer. "We can stay here all day? If that's what you want." She pulled back slightly. "I'd love that. But maybe we should go to your dad's for dinner?" Dominic hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Yeah, we can do that." In recent weeks, he'd noticed how much Arya loved spending time with his family, and how much they adored her in return. Seeing his father smile the way he used to when their mother was alive was something Dominic hadn't expected. She'd brought warmth back into their lives. Later that afternoon, as they drove to his father's house, Arya winced slightly as she sat down in the car. Dominic frowned. "Are you okay?" She waved a hand dismissively. "Just sat down harder than I meant to." He studied her face. "You have to tell me if you're ever uncomfortable." She smiled at his concern. "I'm fine, Dominic." "Really?" Still, he pulled her onto his lap, wrapping his arms around her protectively. "You're always worrying about me," she teased. "That's not going to change." She pressed a kiss to his cheek. "Good." As the car drove through the city streets, Dominic tightened his hold around her, silently promising himself that no matter what, he would always take care of her. Dominic and Ari sit in the car, laughing over a crossword puzzle. Ari jokingly suggests an inappropriate answer, making Dominic shake his head in amusement. Their playful banter turns into a tickling match, filling the car with laughter. Later, they arrive at Dominic's father's house, where his brothers, Mason and Mason, are debating the best way to make mashed potatoes for Thanksgiving. Dominic refuses to let Ari be the judge, but Mason insists. With a teasing grin, Ari agrees to decide. Mason presents the two options, lumpy with butter or smooth with cream. After careful consideration, Ari picks the smooth version, siding with Mason. Mason celebrates his victory, rubbing it in Dominic's face. Just as Dominic sulks over his loss, their father enters and declares that they'll be having potatoes the way their late mother used to make skin on, with butter. As the family laughs over the light-hearted argument, Dominic pulls Ari aside, dramatically lamenting her betrayal. She playfully asks how she can make it up to him, and he promises to think of something. The night continues with drinks and dinner preparations. Dominic watches as Ari easily blends into his family, fitting in like she was always meant to be there. He silently thanks his father for bringing her into their lives, unable to imagine a world where she wasn't by his side. Dominic leaned back against the pillows, watching as Ari traced circles on his chest with her fingertips. Her bright green eyes glowed in the soft morning light as she studied him. "How long will you be in Chicago?" she asked, her voice carrying a hint of reluctance. 3 days, he answered, sighing. Her nose scrunched up in displeasure. "And you leave tonight?" He nodded. 7 o'clock flight. "Promise you'll be back in time for the Christmas party at the shelter on Friday?" She looked at him hopefully. "It's the biggest fundraising event of the year. Everyone's excited that you're coming. You're kind of a celebrity there, you know." Dominic smiled at her enthusiasm. He knew how much the shelter meant to her, even if she didn't have as much time to volunteer these days. "Yes, I'll be there, my amour." Her face lit up. "Thank you. I can't wait for you to meet everyone." Dominic reached up, tucking a strand of her hair behind her ear. "You're beautiful when you smile like that." She grinned playfully, running a hand down his arm. "Well, this smile is just for you." "It better be," he teased. Ari sighed, her fingers stilling against his skin. "I wish you didn't have to go." "Me too," he admitted. He made a mental note to talk to his business partner about moving their annual meetings to Manhattan in the future. She smirked, tilting her head. "Will you behave while you're gone?" Dominic chuckled. "I should be asking you that." Her laughter filled the room, but her expression softened. "I'll miss you." He exhaled, his hand brushing over hers. "I'll miss you too." Reluctantly, he glanced at the clock and groaned. "I have to go." "I know," she whispered. After placing a kiss on her forehead, he pulled himself out of bed, knowing it would be far too easy to stay. Later that afternoon, Ari showed up at his office, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "You look serious," she teased, leaning against the doorframe in her navy scrubs. Dominic smirked. "And you look like trouble." She walked toward him, swaying her hips playfully. I thought I'd stop by and wish you luck on your trip. That's so? He leaned back in his chair, studying her. Ari grinned and crossed the room, settling herself onto his desk. I know you'll be busy, but don't forget to call me. Dominic reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. I could never forget about you, Ari. She softened, squeezing his hand. Good. They sat there for a moment, neither wanting to say goodbye just yet. Finally, Dominic sighed. Come to Chicago with me. She hesitated, looking torn. You know I can't. Work is crazy right now. We had 3 emergency surgeries today alone. He exhaled, trying to hide his disappointment. Maybe next time, if I give you more notice? She smiled. I'd like that. Dominic nodded, knowing something had to change. He wanted her by his side always. And one day, he would make sure of it. Dominic stared into his glass, swirling the amber liquid as he thought of Arya waiting for him at home. The thought of her curled up on the couch in his sweatshirt, watching a sappy movie, made him smile. If not for his meeting in the morning, he would have been on a plane back to her right now. A sultry voice interrupted his thoughts. Want another? He shook his head without looking up. No, thanks. She leaned in closer, touching his arm. Not even a small one? Dominic pulled his arm away and held up his left hand. I'm married. Her eyes flickered with disappointment, but she laughed. Your wife isn't here though, is she? His voice hardened. Doesn't make me any less married. Find someone else. She huffed and walked away, and the bartender chuckled. She's here every night looking for her next target. Can I get you another drink? Dominic hesitated. It was hard to sleep without Arya beside him. Against his better judgment, he nodded. One more. The pounding in Dominic's head dragged him from sleep. The sunlight streaming through the open blinds felt like a knife behind his eyes. A soft groan echoed beside him. His stomach clenched. The scent and presence beside him were unfamiliar. It wasn't Arya. Bile rose in his throat as he threw back the covers and stumbled out of bed. The sudden movement made it worse, and he barely made it to the carpet before he vomited. Are you okay? A female voice asked. Dominic turned and saw a woman sitting up, the sheets slipping down to reveal bare skin. His chest tightened. His head spun. He was naked too. What the hell are you doing here? His voice was hoarse. She looked hurt. What? Well, his gut twisted. He scanned the room, searching for any clue about what had happened. Did we? He swallowed hard. She sighed. We fooled around. You were too drunk to do anything else. Dominic sat down, trying to recall the night before. His memory was fragmented, talking about music, her pouring him drinks, laughing over something meaningless. But nothing else. No recollection of how they ended up here. I don't remember anything, he admitted. She shrugged. Married guys come through here all the time. Means nothing. Dominic's stomach churned with anger. It means something to me. She grabbed her clothes, glaring. Didn't seem to mean much last night. She stormed out, leaving him with a crushing weight of regret. He glanced at his phone and saw Arya's goodnight text. His heart sank. How was he supposed to tell her what happened? What had he done? Dominic sat in his brother Mason's office, his head still pounding. He had cancelled his meeting and taken the earliest flight home. So, you blacked out? Mason asked, frowning. Dominic rubbed his temples. Yeah, at least I think I did. Mason shook his head. I've seen you drunk plenty of times, but you've never blacked out. You downed a whole bottle of whiskey last summer and still beat me at poker. This doesn't add up. What are you saying? Dominic asked, confused. Mason picked up his phone. Bring me one of the drug tests, he told his secretary. Dominic's stomach twisted. You think I was drugged? Mason nodded. Seems more plausible than you suddenly losing all memory after a few drinks. Minutes later, Dominic swabbed his cheek and handed the test to Mason. The wait was agonizing. Then, Mason read the results. Positive for opioids and rohypnol. Dominic's relief and rage battled inside him. I was drugged? Yeah, Mason confirmed. Did you check your wallet? Was anything stolen? No, everything was there. Mason's jaw clenched. She must have had a reason. This wasn't random. Dominic stared at the floor, his fists clenched. If he had been drugged, then whatever happened wasn't his fault. But it still didn't change the fact that he had to face Arya. Snatching the test, he stood. I need to go home. Arya practically bounced with excitement as she waited for Dominic to step off the elevator. 3 days apart felt like an eternity, and she had missed him more than she expected. When the doors opened, she rushed forward, throwing her arms around his neck. Dominic, she squealed. His voice was hoarse. Ari. She pulled back, frowning. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot, and a shadow of stubble lined his jaw. Are you okay? Are you sick? He shook his head. We need to talk. A chill ran down her spine. She followed him into the den, sitting across from him on the couch. His hands trembled as he spoke. Something happened at the hotel. He hesitated. There was a woman, a bartender. I woke up in bed with her, but Ari, she drugged me. Mason tested me. There were drugs in my system. Her breath caught in her throat. She drugged you? He nodded, gripping her hands. I swear I don't remember anything. I'd never cheat on you. Never. Tears welled in her eyes. Not because she was angry at him, but because of what had been done to him. Then, guilt twisted in her stomach. It was Vincent. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Dominic's expression darkened. What do you mean? Aria's hands shook. He had this idea about a honey trap. Dominic's body went rigid. What? The cheating clause. He thought if you cheated, I'd leave, and he'd get the money. Dominic stood abruptly, fury in his eyes. And you knew about this? At first, yes, but I told him to stop. I begged him not to go through with it. Dominic's expression hardened. So, you lied to me. You knew your brother was setting me up and you didn't tell me? Tears streamed down her face. I never wanted this to happen, Dominic. I never wanted to hurt you. His voice was cold. But you let it happen. You let me walk into a trap. She shook her head desperately. I had no idea he would actually go through with it. Please believe me. Dominic exhaled sharply, stepping away from her. The betrayal was too much. I need some time, he said, voice strained. Aria's heart shattered as she watched him walk away, knowing she might never get him back. Dominic stared at his phone, struggling to remember if he had called his brother or if Mason had called him. His heart pounded, his lungs burned, and for a moment he forgot how to breathe. Mason's voice snapped him back to reality, yelling his name through the phone. She knew Mason, Dominic rasped. Dominic, you're not making sense. What? Ari knew. His fury exploded, and with no other target, he directed it at his brother. Knew what? About what happened in Chicago? Taking a deep breath, Dominic forced himself to calm down before launching into the full story, how his wife, Aria, had been part of a scheme to set him up and take his money. Mason listened quietly before cursing under his breath. So they set you up? Ari too? Dominic dropped his head into his hands. He didn't want to believe it, but Aria had confirmed it herself. What do you want to do? Mason asked. We can have her and her brother arrested within the hour. The bartender too. No, Dominic said firmly. I need to know exactly what happened last night. And how do you plan to do that? I'm going back to Chicago, Dominic said, to speak to the bartender. And I have a feeling the Morettas will be interested to know what kind of woman they've been employing in their bar. Don't do anything stupid, Dominic. Dominic clenched his fist, feeling the rage threaten to consume him. But he forced himself to close his eyes and think of his mother's painting the way the sun felt on his face in that memory. Slowly, his pulse steadied. I won't, he promised. Dominic sat across from Ariana Benjamin, a 27-year-old bartender at the Moretti family's hotel. She was trembling, her wide eyes darting to the door as if she expected someone to storm in at any moment. She should be terrified. The Morettas weren't just business owners. They were powerful, dangerous men, and Ariana had made a fatal mistake. She had drugged Dominic's drink while working in their bar. What do you want? She asked, her voice unsteady. Right now, I'm the only thing standing between you and your employers, Dominic said coolly. You do know who they are, right? Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. I'll take that as a yes, he said. She nodded. Tell me what happened last night. You got drunk and we... Dominic slammed his fist against the table. One more chance to tell me the truth before I hand you over to the Morettas. Tears filled her eyes. I met Vincent Edison here at the casino, she admitted. I was paid to hit on a guy he was with. Vincent found out and blackmailed me. At first, he wanted sex, but then he asked me to drug someone and make it look like they had cheated. She wiped her tears away. I said no, but he threatened to tell the Morettas about me. I didn't have a choice. Dominic's jaw tightened. Then he asked me to do it again, she whispered. With you, she sniffled, looking at him with pleading eyes. I'm still waiting for the part where you tell me exactly what happened, Dominic said coldly. I slipped the drug into your drink. You passed out. I called Vincent, and he helped me move you to the bed. Dominic's blood boiled. Vincent was in the room? She nodded. And then? Nothing. We just made it look like something happened. I took pictures. That was it. Dominic inhaled sharply, his hands curling into fists. He studied her face, searching for any sign of deception. But she wasn't lying. Ariana was just another one of Vincent's victims. Still, that didn't excuse what she had done. One of your employers is waiting outside to talk to you, Dominic said. If you're lucky, it'll be Dante or Joey instead of Lorenzo or Max. Her face paled. Please, Mr. Devereaux, she begged. I didn't mean to hurt you. Dominic stood, adjusting his suit. Yeah, but you did. Walking out of the room, he was met by Lorenzo Moretti. The Sicilian man studied him with concern. Did you get what you needed, compagno? Lorenzo asked. Yeah. Dominic quickly recounted Ariana's confession. She messed up, but she was manipulated. She's terrified. Lorenzo grunted. She should be. Dominic glanced at the closed door, a twinge of guilt settling in his chest. What are you going to do with her? She'll never work in the city again, Lorenzo said simply. Dominic exhaled. That's enough for me. And Edison? Dominic's eyes darkened. I'll deal with him. Aria stared at her reflection in the mirror, her eyes puffy from hours of crying. No amount of makeup could hide the heartbreak. She hated the fundraiser tonight. Hated having to put on a smile and pretend everything was fine. But nothing was fine. Dominic was gone. And it was all her fault. She pressed her phone to her chest as Adrian's voice filled her ear. Oh, baby girl. I wish I was there right now. Tears spilled over as she clutched his old football jersey, inhaling the faint scent of him. Your brother is a real piece of garbage, Adrian muttered. If I was there, I'd kick his ass. No, Ad, Aria sighed. Violence won't fix anything. Maybe Dominic will handle it his way, Adrian suggested. Financial ruin seems more his style. Aria bit her lip. Yeah. And it wouldn't take much. Vincent is probably already on the edge of losing everything. Adrian hesitated. What are you going to do now, Ari? I don't know, she admitted, her voice breaking. I feel so empty. Oh, baby girl. Adrian sighed. I wish I could hug you. I wish you could too. After they hung up, Aria stared at the phone in her hand. She knew what she had to do. She needed to confront Vincent. Her heart pounded as she dialed his number. When he answered, his voice was gruff. Why are you calling me this early? Why did you do it, Vincent? Do what? He snorted. You set Dominic up. You knew he was in Chicago. You planned this. Vincent's tone darkened. You better watch your mouth, little sister. I told Dominic, she spat. I told him everything. Silence. Then a roar of fury. You stupid little... I told him. Vincent's breath came in ragged gasps. If I go down for this, so do you. Aria laughed bitterly. So you admit it? Go to hell. I hate you, Vincent, she said, her voice steady. You're dead to me. If you ever come near me again, I'll go to the cops myself. Vincent hung up. Aria let the phone drop from her hands. Everything was broken, and she had no idea how to fix it. Dominic had spent 2 days hunting for Vincent Edison, furious that his time was being wasted. Work was piling up, but this needed to be dealt with first. The moment Vincent resurfaced, Dominic's contacts immediately informed him. Now, sitting across from Vincent in an upscale restaurant, Dominic wasted no time. What the hell were you thinking, drugging me? Vincent paled. It wasn't me, it was Aria's idea. Dominic's fist connected with Vincent's jaw before he could stop himself. Don't lie. Vincent, clutching his bleeding lip, quickly backtracked. Okay, I was there. But she wanted to set you up, make you cheat, then divorce you for a payout. Dominic knew Vincent was lying. Aria may have made mistakes, but something about this didn't add up. So you have the photos? Vincent hesitated before nodding. Dominic leaned in. And how much to make them disappear? A greedy glint entered Vincent's eyes. We can make a deal. Dominic smirked. So, you have the only copies, not Aria? Vincent fidgeted. Yeah. Dominic's suspicions were confirmed. So this was your plan, not hers. Vincent cursed under his breath, calling Aria useless. His words only fueled Dominic's rage. Sitting back, Dominic spoke calmly. You're finished, Vincent. No one will invest in you. Your company is done. Vincent's face crumbled. No, please. We need investors. Dominic stood, offering a victorious smirk. Enjoy what's left of your luxury. because it's all crashing down. As he walked away, a bitter thought lingered. Why did winning still feel like losing? Arya collapsed into a break room chair, exhausted. Work was the only thing keeping her distracted from the pain of losing Dominic. His devastated expression from their last conversation haunted her. Her phone buzzed 4 missed calls from her younger sister, Paige. When she finally answered, Paige was crying. Vincent says, I have to leave college, Paige sobbed. He won't pay the rest of my tuition. Rage surged through Arya. Vincent had money, he just refused to help. How much do you need? 40,000 for this year. But next year is another 80. Arya clenched her fists. There was only one way to get that money. It would destroy any chance of Dominic forgiving her, but Paige's future was more important. Don't worry, Ash, Arya promised. I'll take care of it. But how? I'll figure it out. Hanging up, she knew what she had to do. Vincent had done this to punish her, but she wouldn't let Paige suffer for it. Dominic stared at the painting his mother had finished before she died a beach from their childhood. It was one of his last memories of pure happiness. He was about to lose himself in thoughts of Arya when his phone rang. It was a jeweler from Persephone's. Pardon the intrusion, Mr. Devereaux, the man said, but your wife returned her engagement ring this afternoon. Dominic's blood ran cold. For how much? $160,000. She sold the ring. Their marriage for a fraction of its worth. Dominic clenched his jaw. I want it back. Of course, sir. As he hung up, fury and confusion warred inside him. That money wasn't worth the pain she endured by marrying him. What was she using it for? 4 days later, the answer arrived in an email from his private investigator. Dominic scrolled through Arya's financial records. She had barely $2,000 in her account. But then he saw 2 large transactions, one payment to Harvard, the other directly to Paige. It all made sense. She hadn't taken the money for herself. She had used it to save her sister's education. The revelation twisted something inside him. It didn't change what she had done, but it made him see her in a different light. Which Arya was real, the one who lied, or the one who sacrificed everything for her family? He wasn't sure anymore. Arya fumbles in her purse for the key to Adrian's apartment, balancing a bag of groceries in her other hand. Footsteps approach from behind, making her skin prickle. Turning around, she locks eyes with her brother, Vincent. I have nothing to say to you, she tells him firmly. Vincent grabs her arm and slams her against the door. The impact knocks the wind out of her, sending the groceries tumbling to the floor. His face twists with rage. We just lost our biggest contract. Investors won't even return my calls, all because you couldn't stick to the plan. You ruined everything. Arya refuses to back down. There was no plan, Vincent. You drugged Dominic. You belong in prison, and I hope you end up there. His hand strikes her cheek, sending a sharp sting through her face. Tears burn in her eyes, but she refuses to show weakness. He reaches for her again, but a deep voice booms down the hallway. You lay another finger on her, and you'll be taking a leap out that window. Mason Devereaux. Vincent recoils, his bravado vanishing. He knows better than to challenge Dominic's older brother. Without another word, he turns and flees. Mason steps forward. You okay? Arya nods, rubbing her cheek. Yeah. Thanks to you. He picks up her fallen groceries and hands them to her. Should have beaten the hell out of him, he mutters. She doesn't argue. Instead, she asks, Why are you here? Mason pulls an envelope from his jacket. Dominic asked me to drop this off. Arya takes it and sighs in relief when she sees the Harvard postmark, its Paige's tuition invoice. But then Mason's expression darkens. Did you know what was going to happen in Chicago? Guilt knots in her stomach. I swear I didn't. The fact that Dominic was hurt because of me will haunt me forever. Mason watches her closely before finally saying, nothing happened to him. Her breath catches. What? She drugged him, but that's all. Dominic confirmed it. Relief crashes over Arya like a wave. Thank you for telling me. Mason nods. You should put something on that eye. Then, without another word, he turns and walks away. Dominic stares at Mason in shock. You went to see her? Mason shrugs. I delivered the letter like you asked. I thought you were going to mail it. I wanted to look her in the eye. His expression tightens. She hurt all of us. I trusted her too. Dominic's chest tightens. How was she? Mason hesitates. Vincent was there. Dominic's stomach drops. They planning their next move? No. He hit her. Rage surges through Dominic's veins. His hands curl into fists. He what? I saw him call her a stupid. Mason hesitates, then continues. She told him she hoped he'd go to prison. And then he hit her. Dominic grips the edge of his desk, trying to stay calm. Did you break his arm? I told him to leave, Mason says. Figured you wouldn't want me handling him while you decide what to do with him. Dominic's jaw clenches. That was before he hit my wife. Mason's expression doesn't change, but Dominic knows he caught the slip. He called Arya his wife. For what it's worth, Mason starts. Don't. Mason ignores him. I don't think she had anything to do with it. Dominic slams his fist on the desk. She still lied. She married me for my money. His voice is raw. She made me think I meant something to her. Mason sighs. I know, brother. Dominic presses his hands to his face. He needs to forget her. Later that day, anger still burning in his veins, Dominic storms into Vincent's office. Ignoring the assistants trying to stop him, Vincent pales as Dominic locks the door behind him. Dominic grabs him by the throat. You don't have any deal with me. Vincent sputters. Dominic shoves him back into his chair. You know who I work with, right? Vincent nods, fear shining in his eyes. You know I can make you disappear without lifting a finger. Dominic leans closer. But for you? I'd do it myself. Vincent's face drains of color. Dominic grabs a letter opener from the desk and slams it through Vincent's hand, pinning it to the wood. Vincent's scream is strangled. If you ever touch her again, I will end you. Dominic whispers the words like a promise. Tears stream down Vincent's face as he nods frantically. Dominic yanks the blade free. Good boy. New Year's Eve. The Devereaux family gathers around the dinner table. No cursing at my table. Dalton Devereaux, their father, grumbles as he lights a cigar. Mason scowls. You're supposed to have quit those. It's New Year's. Let me enjoy my vices, Dalton replies. Talk shifts to their youngest brother, Blake, who still lives in Chicago. You should be home with your family, Dalton insists. I like it there, Dad. Dominic listens absently until his father asks, How are things with the Edison girl? A fresh wave of anger rolls through him. Her name is Arya, and she's a lying gold digging. Have you drawn up the divorce papers? Blake asks. No, not yet. Dalton's eyes narrow. What's stopping you? Dominic's grip tightens on his glass. I've been busy. Mason raises an eyebrow. Do you actually want to serve her with divorce papers? Dominic exhales slowly. I don't know. Blake leans in. So there's a chance you don't? Dominic scowls. I guess that's what I don't know means. Mason runs a hand over his beard. Wow, bro. I thought after what she did, you'd never even consider reconciling. I'm not considering anything, Dominic snaps. So you don't want to divorce her, but you don't want her back? Blake asks. You're just leaving both of you in limbo? Dominic's jaw tightens. She doesn't deserve anything better. No, but you do. Dominic doesn't answer. He knows they're right. But admitting it is another story. Arya had fallen into a routine shower, grabbed some snacks, and watched TV in her room. It had been her ritual for the past 3 weeks. But that night, a knock at the door interrupted her solitude. Adrian, her cousin, was out, and she wasn't expecting anyone. Peering through the peephole, her heart nearly stopped. Dominic. Without a second thought, she flung the door open. Dominic? She breathed, shock tightening her throat. His dark eyes held hers, unreadable yet intense. Can I come in? Arya stepped aside, letting him in, her pulse racing as his familiar scent filled the space. His presence alone sent goosebumps across her skin. Is Adrian home? He asked, glancing past her. No. He's out. Silence stretched between them. Then finally, she asked, Did you want something, Dominic? His gaze burned into hers. Instead of answering, he stepped closer, and every nerve in her body came alive. Ari, he murmured, his voice laced with something raw and painful. Before she could react, he closed the distance, trapping her between him and the wall. The warmth of his body seeped into hers, his breath brushing against her forehead. Memories of what they once had surged through her. Dominic's hand trailed along her side, igniting a fire in its wake. Arya knew she should stop this. She had to. But instead, she wrapped her arms around his neck, surrendering to the kiss that followed. It was desperate, consuming, filled with longing and regret. When he finally pulled away, his forehead rested against hers, both of them panting. But then he reached into his jacket, pulling out a brown envelope. I want a divorce, Ari. Her hands trembled as she took the envelope, her heart shattering into a million pieces. She stared at the papers, unable to breathe, unable to process. Dominic didn't look back. He turned and walked out, leaving her alone in the suffocating silence. The moment the door shut, Arya crumpled to the floor, tears streaming down her face. She had lost him for good. Weeks passed, but the pain of that night never faded. Then, staring down at the pregnancy test in her hands, Arya felt her world tilt once more. 2 blue lines. Her stomach clenched, nausea rolling through her, not just from the pregnancy, but from the reality of her situation. How could she have been so reckless? She had ignored the signs, the missed period, the constant nausea. But now there was no denying it. She was pregnant. With Dominic's child. Tears pricked her eyes. It wasn't that she didn't want a baby. She did. But telling Dominic? That terrified her. Would he think she was trying to trap him? Extort him? She almost wished this wasn't his baby, just so she wouldn't have to face him again. But deep down, she knew the truth. If there was one man in the world she'd choose as the father of her child, it would always be Dominic. Her hands pressed against her stomach. "You're a little miracle, Jellybean," she whispered. She needed to tell someone. Someone who would understand. Grabbing her phone, she called Adrian. He answered on the third ring. "Hey, Goose," he greeted playfully.